is Cheryl E. Casias, and I'm a member of the Southern Ute Indian tribe. I'm also an elder. I'm like an advisor. You know, people ask me about different situations that they may be in and how to work through that. And it's a tradition among our people that the elders were very well respected, and they went to them for advice and for to be consoled and to be a teacher. And there's many roles that we have as elders, and also, you know, to ask for prayers. And so it's a person that you go to, that if you need anything that will help them in their life. We had hunting and gathering domains, and that was part of what is now the states of part of it, Arizona, New Mexico. That's just the northern and eastern part of Arizona and New Mexico. And it went into the Great Basin in Utah, and most of the state of what is now the state of Colorado, and into western Kansas, and down into the Oklahoma Panhandle and Texas. So that was our hunting and gathering domain. And in the wintertime, we were down in the Cimarron, New Mexico area. That was our domain. And after we were placed on the reservation, we were placed on the southwest corner of Colorado. Our reservation borders the New Mexico state line. And we now have a reservation that is 330,000 acres. Wow. So that's kind of like a drop in the bucket when you compare that to our hunting and gathering domain. Yes. A sovereign nation is, after we were placed on the reservation, our tribe received, the Southern Ute tribe is made up of two bands, the Mowatch and the Kapota bands. And then the Ute Mountain, they're the Weanooch band. And then we have four other bands that reside in Utah. They were sent to Utah. Their reservation was designated in Utah. So the four other bands that comprise the Utes, they live up there. But getting back to the Southern Ute tribe, once we were placed on the reservation, we were given a choice. We could either remain a traditional government, or we were given a model constitution. So our tribe decided that they would take the model constitution and create our own tribal constitution. So once we did that, then we became a sovereign nation, which means that we have our own tribal government, we have our own tribal laws, and we determine by the Southern Ute Tribal Council, they make the laws and they ratify them, and then the government approves what we have, the new ordinances that we are to be governed by. They have to put their seal of approval. So we have our own laws within the reservation boundaries. We have our own police department, although the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that's a part of the federal government process, mm-hmm. They fund some of our positions within the police department. But we are the ones that set the policies and administer our police department. We have a tribal court, and we finally hired or created a position for a public defender for our tribal membership. We didn't have that before because we were under the Indian Civil Rights Act of 1964, or is it 64 or 68? We were governed by that. And so as a tribe, we went ahead, took another step forward, and we said, we need a public defender because everyone else in the United States has the right to a public defender. So that's what we did. And so we have that, and we have a law firm that we hired back in the 50s. They were hired by the tribal council, and they help us with all our legal issues. We signed a Ute Indian Settlement, a Water Settlement Act in 1968. And so we have the rights of over the 7 rivers that run through our reservation since we've been here for as long as people can remember, way back, you know. So we have those rights. We have those water rights. And we have also rights in Vicedo Lake. There's a dam that was built 20 miles north of us from where our headquarters are. It's a dam that was created back in the 40s, I believe. And so we own a portion of that water, and we're the first to receive irrigation water if we're in a drought. And then we have, of course, as the water runs through our reservation and down into the Colorado River, we have water rights on that also. We used to be able to hunt on our reservation whenever we needed food. You know, our families would go out and hunt on the east side or on the west side of the reservation, and you know, there was no hunting seasons for us. We had that right. And then the council decided that maybe we needed hunting seasons, and so that was established. So we do now have hunting seasons on our reservation. There's specific times when we can go hunting. And so we also there's one agreement that we signed when we gave up the land, 1/3 of the state of Colorado, back during Chief Uray's tenure as our chief. And so he made an agreement with, it's called the Bruno Agreement, and that we would give up that land. And he did not really get approval for that, and went ahead and did that. And in the agreement, it states that because the miners were coming in, you know, they discovered silver in the Rocky Mountains that was part of our domain, and it was included in that Bruno, what we call the Bruno area. And so the agreement was that as long as we were at peace with the non-Indians, that we would be able to hunt and gather in that area. But that sat dormant. Even though it was in the agreement, no one, our tribe or our council, didn't exercise the right to do that. So early 2000, I was on tribal council. I had been on council for 9 years. And so it was towards the end of my... Yes, we do. And this is going to be surprising to a lot of people. We have been here for hundreds of years, you know, as indigenous people, as the Mowach and the Kapota and the other bands of Utes. It wasn't until 1924 that we became U.S. citizens. In retrospect, we were caretakers of this land that, you know, that we had our domain on. Mm-hmm. And so in 1918, some of our young men enlisted in the armed forces to protect and exercising being warriors. And so that was before the 1924. So they went to war in 1918, and since then, you know, we've up until before we were citizens of this country, you know, we were there to protect and to serve, and so did a lot of the other tribes did the same thing. After 1924, it went into a full effect in 1926. So I told people this, and they say, "What? You weren't citizens of the United States?" I said, "No, we weren't." And so, but we do. We have the right to vote. We have our own, our tribal elections to elect our tribal chairman, our council members. And we also have the right to vote in the county. We vote for the county commissioners, and we vote for the state legislators, and we vote in the national elections. We are full citizens of the state of Colorado, and we coexist with our neighbors and with the citizens of La Plata County, because our reservation is located in 3 counties.
Yeah.
A part of it is in Archuleta County, La Plata County, and Montezuma County. So,
wow.
And we get along very well with the county commissioners from all 3 counties. When animals were they conversed in Ute is the story that I got when I was growing up. Grandma would tell us stories, and she said the animals would converse with the Utes, and they conversed in our language. So when Sinawag, that's what we call the creator, asked his little brother Coyote, he said, "I want you to go and gather some sticks and put them in a bag." And he said, "Get as many as you can, put them in a bag, and then I want you to take them to a certain place." And he said, "After you pick them and put them in the bag, do not open it until after you've collected as many as I'm going to instruct you." He said, "Once you close the bag, then you take it, and then I will tell you where you need to take it." And he said, "But you have to promise that you're not going to open the bag." So Sinawag asked Coyote if he understood, and he said, yes, brother, I understand. I know what I need to do." And he said, "Okay, you follow my instructions." Anyway, the Coyote slings, after he collected the amount of little twigs that he had to, he slung the bag over his shoulder and started off on his journey to the designated area where he was supposed to take the bag. And along the way, he decided, curiosity's just getting to me. He said, "I gotta look in this bag." And apparently there was movement in this bag that he was carrying. And so he stopped before he reached his destination, and he opened the bag. And when he did that, these little people started jumping out of the bag. The twigs that he had collected became humans. And they jumped out of it. And so he said, "Oh my gosh, I made a mistake." And so he saved as many as he could, and he quickly closed the bag, but some of them got away. They went running off away from the bag and away from Coyote. And so he's sitting there. He said, "Oh my gosh, now what I'm going to do?" Well, he probably, Chanel won't know what I did, and I'll just go and go to my destination. And then when I get there, I'll tell him, "Here's the bag, and here's what you wanted." And so he does. And so Chanel is sitting there waiting for him, and he says, "What have you done?" And he said, "Oh, nothing." He said, "I just, I'm a little, late, but I'm here, and here's the bag." And he said, "I asked you, what have you done?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I opened the bag," and he said, "These little people came rushing out, and I couldn't put them back in." He said, "And they took off in all different directions." He said, "So I have just a few left." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Let me see." So he opened the bag, and the people that were left in the bag were the Utes. And that's how we were created. So anyway, the others that left the bag and went running in different directions, those are the representative of the other tribes that we coexist with in this land before we had any visitors from the other countries across the big waters. The moral lesson of this story is, if you get directives from, we get messages from the Creator, and, we get inspired as to, knowing right from wrong, we understand that as Indigenous people, that if we are impressed by, or we have, received a message sometimes through dreams or experiences that we have that are, spiritual experiences, we have to listen to those and follow through, because, the Creator is not going to lead us astray. He is not going to send us messages that we cannot accomplish. That, to me, was a moral story behind, the story of Chenal and the coyote and his disobedience. And so the coyote has always been called the trickster, because that's what he did. He, instead of following orders, listening to Chenal, he decided to open the bag and did not adhere to the instructions. And we are, as Indigenous people, we are caretakers we're stewards of this land. We took only what we needed to survive. We protected the lands. We took care of the lands. And so, that was our responsibility. We have a ceremony that we do in the springtime. It's called the bear dance. And that bear dance was given to us by a female bear. Two young warriors went up into the mountains, and they came upon this she bear, and she was growling, and she was doing kind of a dance. And she told them that she would teach them that dance if they would, if they were willing to learn that dance, and they would go back and teach the members of our bands. But one of the brothers, had other thoughts about the she bear, and so she knew that he had an ulterior motive, and it was not the kind of thoughts that she thought were appropriate. And so she destroyed him. And she told the brother, she said, I'm going to teach you this song. You go back to your people after you've been with me, and I've taught you the song and the dance, and you go back and teach it to your people. And it's a dance for the women, and it's to honor the women. And so after he had learned what he had to, he came back, and he taught the bands, that he learned this from the she bear. We have what we call the bear dance in the spring. We make a circular corral, and out of pinyon pine, and part of the corral, and it always faces east. The opening is in the east. And so at the west side, they would dig a hole, and then they would put corrugated tin over that on an oblong box. And then they would take these hardwood, they would put notches in the hardwood. And originally they used bones, and they would run it back and forth on what we call the growler. And it sounds like a growling bear. And so they learned those songs that this young man taught them. And so they sing those songs, and it's women's choice. They get to pick their partner. It has to be a tribal member that's not related to them. So that was kind of I've picked my mate for life, and this is the way it's done among the Utes. And then we acquired the Sundance from the Plains tribes. So we do the Sundance. For many years, we were not a part of the sweat lodge ceremonies, but then we adopted it as a tribe. And it's been recent. It's not like the bear dance. The bear dance has always been a part of our ceremonies. And so we do sweat lodge ceremonies, and we used to have the chicken dance, the turkey dance, the war dances, and then we had what we called the lame dance. The lame dance was, we had a women's war society, and they were brave women. They went before the warriors, and they had these shields. They would go into battle with the warriors, but they were in the front line. And some of them, if they were blessed and protected, they would come back. And some of them didn't come back. They were killed in battle. And so, but the women that stayed home when the warriors and the Women's War Society went to war, when they would be ready, waiting for the warriors to come back. And those that had lost their husbands or their relatives, their the warriors, they would we created a dance called the lame dance, and that was done. That was the mourning dance for those warriors that did not return alive. And but the bodies were brought back, and they were buried, and then the women did the lame dance. And then there was another dance called the tea dance, but I never saw that when I was growing up. So I've heard of the tea dance, but we had a youth group, and the young lady that was head of the youth group, she learned the lame dance, and she taught the girls how to do that. Back when the reservation was created, there was a prohibition against the Sundance. And so what our tribe did was they went ahead and continued to have the Sundance once a year, but they did not let the federal government know that we were having the Sundance. And so it stayed alive. It continued, but it was a hidden kind of ceremony. And then I remember I was about 12 or 13 years old when we were again allowed to have the Sundance on our reservation. So I went to my first Sundance that year. I got to see it, but Grandma used to tell us about it. She was a young woman or a young girl, and she grew up with that until it was prohibited, but she did still participate. It continued, and we still do it today. But that was about the only one that was prohibited, that we could not participate. We could not continue with the Sundance, but it still did. It did not die, and we still do it today. And then we acquired the powwows, from other tribes. We do the powwows now in September during our Ute Fair, which of course we didn't do this year because of the COVID.
Yeah.
And then in May during our bear dance, we also have a powwow. So that's something new that we've adopted from the other tribes. So we became adopted children of my grandmother and my grandfather. When we were growing up, the only language I knew was the Ute language, and my grandfather was Hispanic. And so he spoke to us in Spanish. And so we grew up with those two languages. And then when I went to kindergarten, I didn't know any English. Couldn't speak the English language. And my grandfather told me, there's one very important thing I have to teach you. He said, when you go to school, he said, if you have to go to the restroom, he said, you raise your hand and you tell them, restroom, please. Okay, he said, we don't want you to have an accident. He said, so you learn that, he said, and then as you go to school, he said, you'll learn the English language. And so I was 6 years old when I started learning the English language. And then the more we learned, then we had a trilingual conversation at dinner time, or at meal times, because my brother and I decided that my grandmother needed to become fluent in English.
Wow.
And of course, my grandfather already spoke English, and so we would have a trilingual education. I wished I would have had the opportunity to have a tape recorder. The conversations could have been taped and it would have been a 3 bilingual conversation. I always visited my grandmother and always spoke to her in Ute. That was our conversation. And with Grandpa, we would speak to him in Spanish, but majority of the time he would use English sparingly and then Spanish, And they kept the Spanish and the Ute language alive in our lives. Whereas, some people wanted to become assimilated and they stopped talking Ute to their children and their grandchildren. And but that wasn't the case with us. And it was a good thing because in the 70s, the tribe hired a linguist to translate into a dictionary and had him write the stories that the elders at that time shared with him. And so he did. And in 1975, he published a dictionary, and also, or he had someone put it together, and he also put up the stories in a book form. It was in 2009 or 10. The linguist had asked me to join them. He said, we want to expand the dictionary that was published in the 70s. He said, so would you be willing to join our group? So 3 of us ladies worked for 2 years and we expanded the Ute dictionary. And it's in Ute and then it's in English. So a portion of that book is the Ute words and then the English interpretation. Mm-hmm. And then in another section, it's English and then Ute. And so I had never written the language. The language was not written until he developed the dictionary. And then all of the stories he wrote in Ute. And it also, each sentence has the English version. And so that was what we did, and I was a part of that for 2 years. We did expand the dictionary, and I learned how to pronounce the words because it's written by a linguist, and I never saw my language written, but it is written. So, internet, you can find it on the internet.
That's awesome.
Well, I'll share a story with you. My children were a part of the youth group. I used to take them to the bear dance, and we would go to the sun dance, and we would go to the powwows. And they joined the youth group, and they learned, like the girls learned the lame dance, the boys learned the war dance, and then they learned to make their own regalia. So they learned that part of our culture. And so we visited some schools in Denver. We went to Aurora, and they met with the students there. They had an assembly. And so a lot of the children there, where they were elementary students, and they said, we didn't know there were Indians in Colorado. And I thought, I guess they don't go downtown Denver and see the Indians that congregate around the capital, and in that area, the Plains Indians, and people from other tribes. There's a lot of Indians that live in Denver, work in Denver. There's those that hang around the Capitol building. So my kids, educated them and said, well, there's 2 reservations in Colorado, and they're in the southwest corner down by, if you've ever been to Mesa Verde, we're close to Mesa Verde Park. And so they said, well, do you live in wickiups or do you live in teepees? And my children said, no, we have a tri-level home. We catch the bus and go to school every day during the school year. And they said, well, what do you use for money? Do you use wampum? They did know that. My children said, no, we use American money. We have nickels, dimes, and quarters and dollars. And so they were very inquisitive, and they didn't know any of this, and it was so good. And the children, our children, danced for them, and they explained their regalia and what it means to us as Indian people. They were very proud because they put their regalias together, they worked on them themselves, and so they were a teaching tool for expanding the knowledge about us in the schools. That's what our children used to do. Of course, they're adults now, and we don't have a youth group anymore. So we went different places. We even took them to Winnipeg one year, and there was bilingual bicultural conference, and it was held in Winnipeg in the convention center, and they invited spiritual leaders or medicine men to go to that conference, and they gave talks about our people. And so there was a gathering of some of them. They were in a hospitality room, and there were medicine men in there from the different tribes. And so they specifically asked for our group to come and meet with them. So we went in, and we took our children in there, and we told them, now you have to show the utmost respect to these spiritual people. Be on your best behavior, and don't be silly, and answer questions if they ask you, and but by all means show your respect. And so we did. We went in there, and it was like walking into an electrified room. You could just feel, the spiritualness of all of these spiritual people, medicine men, and my son was, he was 14 at the time, I believe, and he used to wear a coontail on his pants, on his belt, and like he had a coontail. He was just doing it because he thought it was fashionable for him. It didn't have any significance. He just liked the idea. And so one of the medicine men says, what are you wearing? And he said, it's a coontail. And he said, oh, let me take a look at it. So he turned around and showed him. And he said, I really like it, he said. So my son undone his belt and took the coontail off of his belt, put his belt back on, and gave it to the medicine man. And he said, oh, thank you. Aww. He said, thank you very much. He said, wherever you go, he said, I will always keep you in my prayers. Aww. And when I go beyond, I'll still be praying for you, he said. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a wonderful gift, from a medicine man. And because my son, knew what to do when he said, I really like your tail. Because we went everywhere with my grandparents, we went grocery shopping, and my grandfather would talk to the to the men, they'd stand outside alongside the grocery store, leaning up against the wall. And the ladies, I hung out with my grandma. I was seen, but I wasn't heard. That was something that we grew up with. You don't speak until someone speaks to you. And so if they don't speak to you, then you remain silent. That's part of showing respect to the elders. So I was really glad I grew up, in that time and with the elders. And I heard a lot of stories. I heard a lot of gossip, and but that's one thing, and I think universally Indian people understand that, if somebody admires something that is yours, or you made it, or it's something that belongs to you. If someone says, oh, I really like your necklace, or I like your earrings, or, even your shawl or whatever, it's customary that we give it to the person that likes it. And so a lot of times when I go somewhere, I wear something that was given to me, because you can't give away something that was given to you. That is showing respect. Indian tribes do that. Whatever they possess, if someone likes it, you give it away. That is something that we're taught from the time we are little, that you show respect regardless of, who the person is. As long as they're older, you listen to them. Whatever they instruct you to do, whatever they like, you give. Yes, we grew up on elk and deer meat, pheasant, very seldom wild turkey.
Okay.
Most of the time, our turkey came from the grocery store. And then, of course, my grandparents had a few cattle. And sometimes if we didn't have enough deer meat or elk meat, then my grandfather would butcher a beef, and then we stored it in, they had a locker plant at the grocery store, and they rented out lockers.
Wow.
So even though we didn't have electricity, we had access to renting a locker, and our beef was stored there, and we'd go whenever we needed meat. We'd go occasionally and take it frozen from the locker.
Wow.
So, but yes, when I was a little girl, I used to collect lamb's quarters maybe 3 times a week. My grandmother would tell me, now that we're through with the dishes, here's your pan, go get some lamb's quarters. And she'd call it, in Spanish, and it had a name. And so I'd go and collect lamb's quarters, and then I'd have to bring a full pan, because, it shrinks after she'd wash it and boil it.
Oh, wow.
And then cook it. So that was a mainstay. And we helped my grandmother plant a garden. And then it was up to us to weed the garden, water the garden, and make sure, that was our job. But when Grandpa would kill an elk or a deer, she would spend days, after it had been aged and dressed out. She would make jerky. And so we would help her with that. Our job, she'd hang it out on the line, and it was up to us to chase the birds away from eating, our jerky. And we were supposed to flip it over so it would dry on the other side. And so we all, it was a family thing. Everybody had a part. Everybody had a responsibility. Everybody had a job. We all had a responsibility of providing for food on the table. And so that was my job, was to collect lamb's quarters to add to our meal. My grandfather would buy piña nuts, and then we would roast them. And it was really nice, because in the evening, after dinner, we'd get around we had a warm morning heater, and when Grandma toasted our piña nuts, then we knew it was story time. And so we'd all sit on the floor and eat piña nuts, and she'd tell stories. Grandma had a rock that she had a big flat rock, and she kept it real clean and kept it in a bag. And sometimes she would take the jerky out. She had two rocks, a smaller rock that she could hold in her hand, and she would pound the jerky on this rock, and then it would fall off the rock. It would kind of soften up the jerky, and then she would pull it apart. And then when she felt like she had enough, and then she would stop pounding on the deer meat or elk meat, and then she would gather it up and then put it in a bowl, and then she would clean up and wash her rocks and then put them in the bag and put those away. And then she would take some beef tallow, a little bit of beef tallow, put it in a pan, and then she would mix it with the deer jerky or elk jerky, and then she would set it aside, and she would fry potatoes, or if we had pinto beans left over, that would be our meal. And or sometimes in the evening she would just stick some strips of jerky in a pan, and she would toast it in the oven, and then she would pass that. If we didn't have piñon nuts, she would pass out some jerky while we were listening to our stories. Those were delicious, wonderful times. I belong to a board of path keepers for Indigenous knowledge. I'm on a board of directors. They're located in Virginia. I do conference calls with them, and I'm on their board. And so usually when they notify me we're going to have a conference call meeting, they usually send email to my friend, and then she passes it on to me. So yeah, I try to help them, along with what I do for my people. I do different things for the tribe, and we had a situation that, and I was really honored. The incident management team that was created after the virus went, nationwide. And so there are a group of people, and one of the ladies called me and she said, would you please say prayers for the tribe and the community and the command or incident command management team? And I said, sure. I said, I can do that. So I've done that, and I just thought those are some of the things that I participate in. I had been a judge for 12 years, and so when I retired from the judgeship, I started representing tribal members and writing a book of my life. Hopefully by middle of 2021, it may be published, but the COVID really did a number on us, so we thought we'd be published by March, but of course, that didn't happen. So I'll have to wait till next year, I suppose.